the fact that you can throw a good forehand means you have a very good rhythm and pivot on your forehand shot. And the fact that you can't throw a backhand shot means you do not have those two things. A rhythm, like we have gone over in the tip of the whip, and a pivot like we will go on over in a video we should have out fairly soon. With a sidearm, you have a very small pinch point, and it's easy to pivot that disc around that pinch point and get a good rhythm, a good pop on a sidearm. Much easier to do that than a backhand, especially if you're using all four fingers on your backhand and you don't really know what you're doing. You may have a tendency to strangle the pivot. And if you strangle the pivot or you don't have the good whipping motion, you're not going to be able to accelerate the disc the way that you can with a sidearm. Acceleration, that's what you need to, in my opinion, you need acceleration for every shot, every distance. You don't need power for every distance and every shot, but you need acceleration. And acceleration is basically the rhythm, the action of your wrist and the rhythm making that disc pivot around and pop to the target. So you need that. It's got to be quick, pow. I've done other videos. You can look online and find them, and I demonstrate that particular thing. You can see me, I think it's called The Importance of Wrist Action online somewhere. I guess it's YouTube. And you can see me putting at 50 feet without doing anything except for popping the disc like that. So you probably want to see that video, and it answers your question pretty well. There's only three things I can think of. He's using an unstable disc, a very unstable disc, or he's got some special throw where he can just yank the nose down on the disc, or he's strangling the pivot and grip locking and going to the right. If that's the case, then he's got to loosen up these back fingers and let that disc come out of the back fingers and come off of the front fingers if that's his grip. If he's got the stack grip, like Ken Climo used to do, where he's actually coming off these back fingers, that probably is not going to happen anyway. So. If you're a beginner and your throw is tailing off to the left a lot, it's probably because you're throwing nose up. And if you throw nose up, the disc is going to stall early and crash to the left. So you want to keep your wrist down as much as you can and give it as much snap as you can, and it'll probably go straight. Depending upon what disc it is, it's going to fade sooner or later, but it'll go straight longer. Anyway, nose down and good snap. Most putters are fairly neutral in flight. And they have, a normal putter, the AVR and all of its clones, they're not very torque resistant. They kind of force you to throw with better technique, less off-axis torque, flutter, and they go where you throw them. So you learn the feel of where to throw the disc, you get the feedback, and once you are able to throw a putter with confidence, especially if you could throw a sidearm putter. I mean, geez, if you can throw a sidearm putter, you can throw anything, because they don't have a lot of torque resistance, and they're much more difficult to throw sidearm than just about any other disc out there. So you start with a putter, get good with a putter, and you can move on to just about any disc after that. If you have a DX disc and it's domey, most likely it's going to be less stable, have more glide than other DS discs that are not as domey. That's not necessarily true with the higher tech materials like Champion or Star. It could be that a Domi disc is less stable, but it could be that a Domi disc is more stable, like our new Halo series stuff, or EchoStar. Sometimes the EchoStar destroyers, some of those were very Domi and very stable. So the plastic doesn't necessarily affect the flight of the disc, but the way that the plastic is injected to the mold can. Kind of depends upon how you're using that putter. If you're talking about sidearm driving, you want a flatter type putter, unless you are really, really good with your sidearm and it's just clean as a whistle, then you can throw anything. But if you want a little bit more safety factor and less off-axis torque, a little more torque prevention, you want a lower profile putter to drive sidearm. For backhand, because the backhands tend to come out cleaner than the sidearms, you can drive with just about any putter. But if you're talking about windy or something like that, big beads, drivers, whales are outstanding driving putters. James Conrad uses a JK type putter. That's basically a big bead with a softer material. Outstanding driving putter as he demonstrates. Basically, you want a stable putter for either backhand or sidearm. And for sidearm specifically, you want a lower profile putter. I used to use this one, no offense, Flip the Birdie grip. I think this is an outstanding all-around grip. Some people use fan grips or full power grips if they know how to modulate the speed well. Well, I guess if you're driving a mid-range, you'd want to use a full power grip, potentially. If you're just throwing an upshot, that may be too much. You take a finger off like that, or even take two fingers off like that. That's a pretty good grip for approach shots with mid-ranges. The wider mid-ranges generally have more torque resistant than smaller mid-ranges. But also, the smaller ones are easier to get going than the wider ones. So I guess it just depends upon what you want. So what you need to do is get a low profile mid-range like a Rock 3 or even a Mako 3. It's unstable, but slightly unstable, but it's low profile. You want to get a low profile mid-range, which will help you with your problem, which is almost certainly off-axis torque. You're fluttering a thing, you don't have a clean release. Another thing that'll help with is to make sure you spin that disc as quickly as you can. The quicker you can pop that thing, the less likely it is you're going to have off-axis torque. If you're chugging through that thing, just dragging through that thing, then it's almost impossible to throw a good shot. So low profile, quick hit. Wow, as a beginner, rhythm. You want to learn a whip rhythm. You don't want to be slinging it. You're not hurling it. It's not a shot put. You have to snap it. That's what you want to learn how to do. Snap the disc, snap your putt, snap your sidearm, snap your backhand. That's what you want to learn how to do first. Generally, if you're throwing a disc into the wind, you want a more stable disc. And you want a cleaner release. You don't want any flutter going into a wind. If you flutter even an overstable disc into the wind, it's gonna tail off until it catches itself and comes back to stability. If you're throwing downwind, if you're using an overstable disc and throwing downwind, you're gonna have to throw like distance throwers do, like this, so it just doesn't crash to the ground to the left. Because basically, it's not being held up, so it's going to want to fall down, and it's going to want to fall down to the left. If you're throwing into a wind and you want the best results, just for being able to cut through the wind and have torque resistance, you want a low profile disc. You're throwing downwind, just the opposite. You want a glider, so you want a domey disc, and it doesn't have to be low profile at all. It's domey, and you don't really have to worry about off-axis torque as much if you're throwing downwind, because the relative wind velocity is much less because it's with you. And the one I've said before, I mean, the Viking, that's been an underrated disc forever. At one time, I considered it to be the best fairway driver out there. When it was the first year or so it was out there, you could throw it side-on, backhand, and it had a slightly unstable characteristic, but it's more stable than a Valkyrie, for instance. It was just extraordinarily useful for staying on the fairway. It wasn't the longest driver out there, but it sure was the easiest one to keep in the fairway. The first thing that comes to mind is, if you're a beginner, start with a beginner set, 150 class discs. We have that beginner set. And if you want to progress, then I would say get those same models in heavier weights. You don't have to get the heaviest weights, but putters, for instance, there's a significant advantage of having a heavy weight putter and a significant advantage of having a heavy weight mid-range, but not so much with a driver, because the drivers, you're generally going full tilt on a driver, and the heavier it is, the harder it is to get going in the first place, and it's not going to fly unless you really can get that thing going. So I wouldn't necessarily go up to maximum weight on a driver up to 165 and you'd be fine. Use your thumb to control the pressure of the disc release, and follow the disc release from your thumb to your target. I think a regular old AVR is one of the best putters for beginners. It's stable without being overstable. For beginners going to have a hard time accelerating their putts. They're not going to have a very big range. An overstable putter just fall to the left for them. So you want something that's either just barely stable with fairly good carry, like an AVR, or maybe a Colt lower profile putter. And probably the best thing to do if you're a beginner is a lighter weight putter, like a 150 class or something. If any of you guys out there want me to answer other questions about discs or history or how to throw or anything that you can think of, just leave a comment. Thanks.